All right, well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the second of our series of thinning meeting webinars for the Champlain Valley. I'm Mike Bastow, Tree Fruit Specialist with the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program. And before we begin, I'd like to once again make a shout out to our commercial sponsor, Wesco in Conway, Massachusetts, with a big thank you for their financial support for this series. The people at Wesco would like to thank everyone for this opportunity and remind you that they're here for you with parts, service, and sales support through these stressful times. OESCO staff may be reached at 413-369-4335 Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So our focus today will be on thinning strategies for the 10 to 12 millimeter timing with Dr. Terence Robinson of Cornell University Agritech. This meeting will also provide us an opportunity for you all to discuss and ask questions as to what you've been seeing from your thinner application so far. So with that, I'm going to turn my screen over to Dr. Robinson.
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to start today with just a little bit of interaction, and then I'll give a short presentation. I was unable to make it to the Champlain Valley. I'd hoped to be there to really see with my own eyes. I'd like just a comment from 2 or 3 of you about what you're seeing. Now, let's start with you, Mike. What are you seeing so far with Honeycrisp?
So generally with Honeycrisp, I think things are setting up pretty well. We had across a lot of orchards, really good bloom, good pollination weather. I think for blocks that got ATS, we've seen some decent thinning with it. We followed it up with a petal fall. So things are coming off. Where we hit it with NAA at bloom, followed up by petal fall, I think there's still a decent amount out there.
Good. What are you seeing with Max?
So with Max, generally they're set up pretty well again this year. I would say in general there's still work to be done on those blocks as well.
I know not everybody grows Gala, but many do. What do you see with Gala?
Gala still seem to be set up pretty well. Whether they got ATS or NAA at bloom, I think there's still a very strong set there and still a decent amount of work to be done. Yeah, as Jesse said in the chat box, they're really glued on there. So we still have some work to do there.
And what do you see with Snapdragon?
So I haven't had a good look at Snapdragon blocks yet. Maybe someone else could comment on those.
I was hoping, in addition to your comments, anybody else want to make a comment about what they're seeing on either of those varieties I mentioned?
I'm seeing Gala starting to thin off, still a little heavily set. I'm seeing some good differentiation in the fruitlets. I'm concerned about Honeycrisp. I hate admitting all my mistakes, but I feel I missed an ATS application in full bloom after a very light crop last year, so I should have done better at that. I did at petal fall 10 parts of acid, and in kind of poor thinning conditions. I had heat, but it was a kind of windy day, followed by some rain, and I looked at the trees over the last couple of days and didn't see any early signs that there was any thinning on the Honeycrisp. The fruitlets were all kind of looking very healthy and turning up. No differentiation in size. So I went through, and partly because it was another poor day for thinning yesterday with being cool and sunny, I kind of boosted the and I'm at about 10 to 12 millimeter size there, and reapplied with another 10 parts of acid. So other varieties seem to be doing pretty well. I think that Max are still showing some need for some extra thinning. Early varieties look good, and yeah, those are pretty good.
Okay, great. Anybody else want to comment?
Jesse, are you unable to are you able to unmute yourself? Otherwise, I can read in what you got in the chat box here. So Jesse wrote in that as far as his Snapdragons go, they're not thinning as easily. They seem to have gone a little biennial on him.
Okay. Okay, I'll make some comments about Snapdragon as we go through. Well, let me give a few comments and a couple of slides about what I've seen just from a distance and looking at the carbohydrate model and getting a little input from a few people. Bear with me a few moments while I try to share this screen. So last week in our meeting, the big concern was the heat wave, and we were at Petal Fall. And that heat wave was pretty substantial in terms of its impact on the tree. Luckily for the Champlain Valley, you were still early in the terms of fruit development, Petal Fall. And at Petal Fall, fruits are not as sensitive to carbon deficits. We published a paper where we showed a significantly less sensitivity at Petal Fall than at the 12 millimeter. Unfortunately, in the Hudson Valley, that heat wave hit right at the 12 millimeter stage, and so there's a lot of concern. In fact, I told them that the heat wave was a thinning event, and many fruits would drop naturally because of the deficits that the trees experienced. In your case, those deficits, I don't think, cause a tremendous amount of thinning, but when combined with the Petal Fall spray in and around that heat, should have given pretty decent thinning and have us well on our way towards a really nice thinning job. Now, this week, we're moving one step further in the precision thinning model. This week is the week for what I call the 10 to 13 millimeter spray. And I'll get some specifics as we get to the next few slides about when that is. This is the main period of sensitivity of the fruits to chemical thinners. We hope that we get some deficit to help us on years when there's no carbohydrate deficit in this period. We get mild thinning. And we probably need substantial thinning on many blocks, especially Gala, which is set up heavy, but also Honeycrisp, because it's the on year for many orchards. We really need substantial thinning. I have suggested, and this model shows it clearly, that after the Petal Fall spray, we measure fruit diameters and calculate how many are actually growing. I haven't received any data from anybody in the Champlain Valley to know if the fruit growth rate model is showing if we're got basically all our thinning done or not. That leads us to be a little bit blind in this presentation. I really like using that data to drive the decisions on how much to put on at this point in time. Now, I'm going to suggest a little later that probably later in this week is the optimum timing. So maybe some of you are measuring fruits and you take your second measurement tomorrow or something and send me the data, and then we can publish that in some sort of a email about what we're seeing from the data. But I hope that you would consider the value of this measuring fruit diameters and using the fruit growth rate model, because certainly in this year, the heat last week plus Petal Fall sprays in and around that heat could have given us almost all we need on some varieties. And that's what you really want to know before you go forward with this next spray. Now, I want to review that at this timing, at 11 to 13 millimeters, our main chemical options are the combinations with 7, either NAA at 7 or Maxell at 7. But if you are one of the farms that's doing a carbaryl-free thinning, you can do almost the same thing with Maxell and NAA combined instead of having 7 with either one of them. I would note that we'll probably meet next week and hopefully have some data to see how much thinning we've achieved. But if we need more thinning, and I'm guessing we might not, but we won't decide that then the option is to add some oil to the mix to get substantial thinning when the fruits are really big. So for 2020 and at this timing, what I call the 12 millimeter timing, I really suggest that you use the carbohydrate model to avoid overthinning. Now I'm going to show you the data from Peru in the next slide. I don't think there's any chance of overthinning because we're not projected to have that low of deficits in this week. The other thing the carbohydrate model gives you is a timing window, because we've included in one of the last columns a degree day calculator based 38 degrees Fahrenheit. And we found over many, many years of studies that the best thinning almost always coincides with a period between 200 and 250 degree days. So when you need thinning, that's the window to try to target. Well, let's look at the data from Peru that I ran just an hour ago. And the upper part is the chart showing the trend line of the average carbohydrate balance since green tip. And you'll see that last week on May 25th, 26th, 27th, we had this long-term substantial deficit of around -50. I don't know if I've ever really seen that level of deficits in the Champlain Valley. I put the actual data here in the bottom part, starting on the 26th, the first 90-degree day. And you'll see that the nighttime temperature on that day was 58, getting close to 60, but we had bright sunshine. So it gave a daily deficit of only -42, which is substantial. But the next day, we had higher temperatures and very warm night. And even though we had bright sunshine, that gave us a deficit of -80. That's concerning. At this timing, though, we were at the 100-degree days, which is in the petal fall window. So we know that that level of deficit doesn't cause too much natural thinning on its own, and probably would have been very helpful to get good thinning when that deficit is combined with chemicals. The day after, on the 28th, was 83, still warm night, but darker, and -72, and then an 80-degree day. And this gave this day, because it's quite cloudy on the 29th, which was Friday, gave substantial, the biggest deficit I think I've seen in looking at this over the years in the Champlain Valley. When we move forward to this week, on Monday the 1st, well, we're now much, much cooler in the 60s, lows in the high 30s. And so we switch from a deficit to almost positive daily. Well, the daily certainly is almost zero. Or the daily is above zero, but the 7-day average is still slightly below zero. But as we look forward, today, June 2nd, Tuesday, still cool, quite cloudy. But as we look forward, it's scheduled to be warming up on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so that window seems like it's going to be the best opportunity to thin. We don't have nighttime temperatures above 60, but we get relatively close with a 56 and a 58, which we need for thinning. We have a daytime of 84. Now, 84 with dark weather would be worrisome, but this is a pretty sunny day. And so there's just one day of -40. And I predict the model is going to tell you to thin with standard rates, because that's only one day. I would like you to notice in the last number column, these are the 3 days highlighted in green when you're between the 200 and 250 degree days. So our long-term experiment would suggest that starting on the 5th, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are the days when you might expect the best thinning, if that's what you're trying to achieve. Now in the Champlain, where there was not so much frost damage as in the Hudson Valley, and just listening to the reports a few minutes ago, I would guess that most of you need substantial thinning. And it looks like it's shaping up to be a really good window. It's not extremely negative carbohydrate balance to make us worry about overthinning, but there's at least 2 days of negative on the 4th and the 5th that I think will help us get thinning if that's what you need in your block. So now let me just give, in my last slide, some suggestions. So I think that the optimum time, according to degree days, is Friday through Monday. But Thursday and Friday also look really good. So there's probably no real reason to wait. If you find a good window Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, any one of those would be great opportunities to thin. You have good daytime temperatures, but not high temperatures. And you have moderately good nighttime temperatures, but not excessively high night temperatures, which all combine to give mild carbohydrate deficit. Thus, thinning is expected to be normal with little chance of over-thinning. Now, I would add that the temperatures and the sunlight combined, I think, will give us good thinning. I don't think it's going to be, really, really mild thing. I think it'll be good thinning because we're right in the middle of this timing when it's most sensitive. So to give some specific suggestions, if you need substantial thinning, I think you should be spraying a full dose at this timing. I want to spend just a couple of minutes trying to talk about what a full dose is. Now for Galen Snapdragon, and I would hasten to add, these are for mature Snapdragon because we can over-thin young Snapdragons easier. But mature Snapdragons, they thin harder. Now, I would say anything that's 6 years or older would be considered mature Snapdragon. They should probably get a full dose of 64 ounces of Maxell. That's on a dilute tree roll volume equivalent basis, on 1 pint of 7 dilute tree roll volume equivalent basis. I'm sorry, but I forgot to take out a piece of this slide that I was preparing for the Hudson Valley. The oil shouldn't be in there at this timing. I'll correct that before Mike posts this. But the point I wanted to make is that sometimes growers get confused about what we mean by dilute tree roll volume equivalent. That rate, let's say the 64 ounces of Maxell, is for 100-gallon trees. If you have 200-gallon trees, it should be twice that. So every block, you should calculate the tree roll volume. Now, most mature tall spindles, if they're really tall and filled out, measure about 200 gallons. And so that would be 64 times 2, which is 128 ounces, or a full gallon per acre. And it would be 1 pint of 7 times 2, which would be 2 pints of 7 to the acre. Now that is more than what sometimes people understand when I give these recommendations. If, however, you have a hedged tall spindle or not fully filled out, generally the hedged tall spindles are measuring at 150 gallons. So you would take that 64 ounce base rate and times it by 1.5, which would be 96 ounces, and the 7 by 1.5, which would be 1.5 pints of 7 per acre. Now that hopefully will help you calculate the rates, at least to match up with what I say. I would hasten to add that every grower kind of has experience, and if those rates are not what you could feel comfortable with, go with what you feel comfortable with. For Honeycrisp, we prefer NAA N7, but the dose at this timing needs to be a substantial dose, which is 3 ounces per 100 gallons dilute tree roll volume equivalent. So the way that would calculate, if it's a mature tall spindle orchard, which is 200-gallon tree roll volume, that's 6 ounces of NAA to the acre and 2 pints of 7. Now, if it was a really hot period and substantial deficits, we would tell you to reduce that rate. But this looks like it's going to be a really nice window, and we'll call for full dose of the chemicals. Now for McIntosh, we can do very well with a lower rate of NA, only 2 ounces per 100. But for a mature tall spindle orchard, that's basically 2 times that, 2 ounces, which is 4 ounces to the acre, and 2 pints of 7. So that's what I had thought I would talk about just as an introduction. And now I'd like to just move to a question. Well, one more comment about this measuring fruits. How do you know if you did a decent job with both the bloom spray, the petal fall spray, and now the 12 millimeter spray? You have to measure fruitlets. And they should be measured 3 days after this application that you would make Thursday or Friday or Saturday or Sunday. And then 8 days after that, and use the model, which is on the web, MaluSim Fruit Growth Rate Model. Send me the data if you want me to look at it and interpret it and give you suggestions. But based on that data, you would find that either you're done thinning or you need more thinning, because there will be one other opportunity in about a week and a couple of days to put on one last spray if nothing worked for you. Then you need more thinning. So with that, I'd like to talk, just have some discussion for as long as you'd like about your specific situation, what you're seeing, what your worries are, and what your questions are.
All right, thank you, Terence. We have a pretty small group here, so if anybody wants to address Terence directly with their questions, feel free to unmute yourself, turn your camera on, and ask your questions directly. I do know we did have an email question, Terence. Can you review your recommendations for Cortland's at this time?
I should have put that on there. For Cortland, I really like just NAA alone, 5 parts per million, but with no 7. So this upcoming window, say Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just 5 parts of NAA alone, I think will do a really fabulous job on Cortland.
Okay, great. I will also mention, Terence, I am doing some fruit measurements this year. Those petal fall applications went on Saturday. So today was our first day of measurements, and I plan to remeasure those on Saturday as well. And a few Champlain Valley farms that I've talked to do plan on doing the fruit measurements this season.
So that would be fantastic data to have as you're trying to make a decision whether to spray Friday or Saturday or Sunday. It'll be, I guess, if you wait for those measurements, it'll have to be Sunday or Monday. But I don't think the fruit's too big. We're still in that window between 200 and 250 degree days when we'll get excellent thinning. It just looks like a couple of days before that, Thursday and Friday, it all looked like really nice combination of temperatures and carbohydrate deficits.
So I guess I'll ask Terence, you know, say we measured today, if we went back on Friday a day early, would we still be able to use those measurements, or do you need that full 4 days between the two to really see the difference in that rate of change of the growth?
You'd see the difference by Friday. What happens is that the two populations of fruit, those that are falling and those that are still growing, separate more and more and more. So if we measure on Friday, there will be a few fruits that we misclassify that maybe are going to fall off and we think they're going to grow, or ones that are still growing but are really going to fall off. But the error is relatively small. So if it meant that we could make a more informed decision by measuring on Friday to know what to do on Saturday, I would prefer that.
Okay, great. So does anybody have any questions for Terence? Again, feel free to chime in directly, or you can enter them into the chat box.
Mike, this is Jesse. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Jesse.
Okay, I got kind of a janky setup here. Sorry. So my question is going back to those Snapdragon trees, and again, to echo Mike's sentiment, we're trying to pay attention to our fruit growth rates, and in our blocks where we went with some bloom 10-part NAA at bloom plus getting into the petal fall spray. I don't know that we've seen a whole lot from the petal fall spray. I think our average temperature on Monday was like 49, and started the day at about 36 degrees here on the farm, and I think on Sunday it wasn't much warmer. So we ended that petal fall window in some pretty, I guess, unfavorable thinning weather. But where we got the 10-part NAA on bloom, I think in general, we're counting it up as we still have somewhere between 3 and 5 active fruitlets, meaning we took off. We've stopped like 1 to 3 at this point, I think, and the rest seem to still be growing from what I can tell at this juncture. But we're only now somewhere between 1 to 3 at the earliest days out, like you mentioned from our petal fall spray. But my question, going back to, this might not be similar for other people, but somehow we managed to take our Snapdragon pretty biennial. I think we just overloaded them. We thinned them down to singles, but I think we were asking too much out of 3 and 4 year trees, and as a result of the total volume of fruits on those trees, we have sent them pretty biennial. And so I was hoping Terence could maybe comment on some strategies for how best to bring through that crop with, boy, I'd call it maybe a 50% crop on those trees or something like that. Should we leave doubles? Should we, any recommendations for handling that and getting the trees back on track for a normal crop load next season?
So when you have a lighter crop, this is true for almost all varieties, but can be applied to Snapdragon, leaving doubles and not exceeding your target number, you can still get very good fruit size. The problem is sometimes people leave doubles, and then when they count the fruit at the end, there's more fruit on the tree than there should have been, and fruit size is reduced. We did a study many years ago where we left all the trees with singles or all the tree with doubles, but the same total fruit on the tree, and they essentially had the same fruit size at the end. So it's the resources the tree has to put into those fruit to make the size. And leaving doubles when the crop is light is a very successful way to handle that. And so that would be the strategy for this year. However, next year is the key year when they will probably bloom heavily. That's when you really have to break the cycle. Now, breaking the cycle with Snapdragon is easier than with Honeycrisp, but it can be done relatively easily with some Blossom ATS, some Petal Fall NA7, and then some Maxell 7 later. As you know, or I've said it a couple of times, but Snapdragon gets harder to thin as the trees get older and they don't have that much vigor. So next year will be the big year. In addition, next year, when the Snapdragon are on, they should receive the same sort of return bloom sprays that you're using on Honeycrisp, which is either NAA starting about mid-June every 10 days, or ethereal starting mid-June every 10 days. But good question. Thanks, Jesse.
We do have another question from Gary. I think this one is really for the room. Is anyone confident that their petal fall thinner on Honeycrisp was enough to do the job this season?
So I want to comment on that. If the petal fall sprays went on around or with the heat, it may have done enough. But if they went on late or after we got into the cooler period, they probably were not going to do enough thinning, and we'd probably get some good thinning out of it, but not near enough. So this will be very interesting to see how this plays out as we get some fruit growth measurements, because where you put on blossom thinning and then petal fall, it'll be possibly enough, but I doubt it if those petal falls went on Saturday or Sunday.
I can add to that. We put our petal fall thinning spray on our Honeycrisp on Thursday, 10 parts and 7. It went to 89 degrees that day and 92 the following day. And I've just been out assessing it. We still have clusters of 3 and 4. We are starting to see a little bit of size differential, but still the king is strong, and 2 laterals are strong as well. So we're kind of scratching our head as to what we start coming back with. We've got 80 degrees forecasted for Thursday and 85 to 89 forecasted for Friday.
But the one thing I want to encourage you about, Will, is that I said it earlier, but I'll repeat it. At petal fall, the fruits are just not as sensitive. Even with very high temperatures, we don't get over thinning or a really aggressive thinning. But this week, we're now at a little further development. The fruits are bigger, and so they demand more carbohydrate. So the sweet spot is when this 200, 250 degree days. I should have run a Southern Vermont to check on where you are, but I'm presuming that Thursday, Friday is just going to be a perfect timing for you to go in and finish the job.
In regards to say Macintosh, or whether they seem to not have been affected, and we applied those on Friday. We applied 7.5 parts of NAA and 7 on Friday when it was in the 90s, and they just didn't seem to respond very much to that thinner. Would you come back with another 7.5 parts, or would you go with Maxell at that point?
For Macintosh?
For Macintosh.
Yeah, I think either NA or Maxell would work great. But if you have the chance to go in this week in those high 70s and low 80 days, you'd get a really good response from Maxell this year.
Okay. At what rate?
Well, on the max, I recommend 48 ounces. Now, if they're a 200-gallon tree, it's 2 times that. It's 96 ounces to the acre.
Okay.
If it's 150-gallon trees, because lots of your trees are thinner, narrower type of things nowadays, and so you really ought to calculate the tree row volume.
Okay, thank you.
Hi guys, this is Jesse again. I got one more for you, if that's all right.
Sure.
I want to make sure I had my notes right on this from one of the other, might have been the Capital District meeting. I've attended a few of these thinning meetings, but just with regards to Maxell, I heard it. I think I heard it come up that they said that Maxell has like a proprietary blend of like some oils or some penetrants in it. Are there any considerations for like switch? Was it right that there are some considerations for switching over to Captan if you're going to be doing some Maxell in the orchard, giving yourself like 10 days before you go over to Captan, or did I mishear that?
So there is a load of surfactant in Maxell. I don't know what it is. For years, I've been trying to get that information from the company, and they say it's a trade secret because other companies make benzyladenine product, and Valent likes to believe theirs is better because of this formulation that they have. We've never really had the problem with Captan and the surfactant that's in Maxell. So I don't generally worry too much about it. But if we're using oil later, suppose we get to 18 millimeters and we haven't got any thinning, and we're going to put Maxell 7 and oil out, then we have to be concerned about the Captan in and around that oil. But I don't think you need to worry about Captan injury with just Maxell. I hesitate to say what I think it is in there. Just by the way it foams, I think it's a silicone-based surfactant. But that's something I haven't been able to learn. Maybe you could help me figure it out. Well, one other comment, the 7XLR also has some surfactant in it, and Dick Straub of the Hudson Valley Lab seemed to think that he thought they were putting some soybean oil in the 7XLR. So if you're going to be using Captan, we suggest the 7L or wettable powder. But those are all rumors that's been really hard to nail down because the companies won't open up about exactly what's in the product.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Terence before we log off today?
I've got one quick one. Traditionally, I thought that application of 7 was not quite so rate sensitive, and it seems like the new instructions are very much tied to tree row volume, and that also in the past it seems like after applying 7 once, you could adjust with further applications of NAA. But if 7's already been applied in an earlier, thinner application, do we still follow this formula with that NAA plus 7?
Yeah, you're correct. The 7 is relatively rate insensitive. There's only a limited amount is soluble in water. And the only part that's soluble in water is what can be absorbed by the leaf and have its impact on the physiology of the plant. And that's basically about 1 pint per 100. The second pint, if you concentrate it according to what I've just told you, is not really in solution, and it's just deposited out on the leaf as a layer. But the reason that I've suggested that is, number one, to simplify things about concentration. Concentrate the Maxell, concentrate the NAA, and just to simplify it, concentrate the 7. But the second reason is some re-wetting from dews and rain gives us some additional thinning. On a year that's very high temperatures at this timing, or there's damage to fruitlets and we're worried they're all going to fall off, I specifically recommend against putting in that second pint of 7 into the tank. But this year, where it looks like everything's good and we don't have big deficits, I think that second pint will help you. That make any sense, Dan? It's not in solution. It can only help you if it gets a little bit of re-wetting. Oh, now the other part, maybe I misunderstood your question. If 7 goes on earlier, is there any benefit to 7 a second time? Yes, there is. And the main benefit is that it potentiates or causes Maxell to have a better response. For example, if you put on NA and 7 at petal fall and then just came in with Maxell by itself, it's just not a very great thinner without 7. And so the 7 really makes Maxell shine. Now that's why we've been so against losing 7 due to marketing issues or regulatory action. But it turns out that if we have NAA with Maxell, it also does sort of the same thing. It potentiates the response of Maxell.
Maybe I misread your notes or my notes from your slide, but you also what I wrote down was that the recommendation for max that may need thinning in this new window has 2 ounces per 100 of NAA plus 7. So does the same thing hold true for NAA as Maxell?
Yes.
Okay.
In days before we started recommending this combination of NA and 7, people would probably either one or the other. But to get the same thinning response, and we compared this a number of years, we had to have NAA rates 50% higher. So if, for example, we were trying to thin Goldens, we'd have to be up in the 15 parts per million to get thinning of NA alone. But when we mixed it with 7, we could do the same thing at 10 parts per million of NA. The same applied all the way through, where with max NA alone, we needed 7.5. Now with 7, we can spray and get thinning at 5 parts per million of NA. So it allowed us to use more moderate rates of NA. Now, one of the reasons for that change, which happened in the 90s and work we have done, if you were spraying NA alone and you got high temperatures, man, it was potent. Just burn everything off. But having slightly lower rates where we never went above 10 parts per million with 7 in the mix just made it a lot safer. We didn't really understand carbohydrates at the time, but I think what we're dealing with at that time was carbohydrate deficits, and then 10 parts of NAA alone was just really potent. So the combination seems to have been much more safe over the last 20 years.
Terence, I had a quick question in regards to our first application on Wild Twist and Pink Lady. Obviously, 2 different rates. We put 5 parts of NAA and 7 on the Wild Twist, and I put 10 parts onto the Pink Ladies. But one thing I see the flagging in the tree, and this year I'm seeing the flagging, but I'm also seeing like almost a discoloration, like a yellowing of the tree, which I've never seen before. We are under a little bit of a drought stress. And so I'm wondering, could it be attributed to the drought stress with the thinning activity causing the tree to be stressed even more? What would be attributing a little bit of yellowing of the leaves?
Have you dropped any of the very small spur leaves?
No.
Okay. Was there anything else in the tank? Was strep in the tank?
No.
So you're seeing this on primarily Pink Lady?
We did apply strep, but at a separate, the same day, but at a different tank.
Mm-hmm. But you're seeing this on Pink Lady, the one you put 10 parts per million on?
Yes.
And it had
Pink Lady-
seven with it, or no 7?
7 with it.
Probably just a combination of the relatively warm temperatures that were around that time that was causing more chemical uptake and a little bit of toxicity from the chemical. NAA is generally not very toxic to the plant. It won't yellow up leaves like, say, streptomycin will.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Terence, I have another question for you. Just for this timing, shutting off the bottom nozzles, and should they be adjusting rates up based on that new spray volume, or what would be your main recommendation there?
We generally have found when we've done trials that by shutting off the bottom nozzles completely, we get a better distribution of fruits with not all the fruit in the top and light crop in the bottom. So if you put on a petal fall spray, I would suggest that we reduce in the bottom of the tree, either shut the nozzle off completely or just put out only 10% of the chemical to the bottom part of the tree. The big thing you have to remember is that the whole tree needs a full dose. So if we're talking about 128 ounces of Maxell, you then have to put out that 128 ounces through fewer nozzles. Either drive slower or re-nozzle so that you still get the 128 ounces on the acre. But you try to focus that application on the upper part of the tree. So if you've got a bank of 9 nozzles, let's say, I'd shut off the bottom 3 and then leave the other 6 open. But either change your speed or change your concentration in the tank so you can still get out 256 or 128 ounces on that acre.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Terrence, I kind of came in kind of late on Empires. Coming back with our second application, would you go the full rate of Maxell on the Empires?
So Empires, you have to tell me, Will, were the Kings there or did they get damaged? Because almost everywhere we've had, Empire is the variety that's had the most damage from frost.
So we had about 30% damage on our Kings.
So you still have like 70% of the Kings present? Then I
Yeah.
go with the full rate.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We've been out measuring the fruit, like you had suggested, after our last spray with a micrometer, just kind of trying to get an idea as to what's growing. But the Empires didn't seem to move as much as the other varieties.
You know, Empire responds really well to Maxell 7. It's one variety that's quite responsive. I like that combination a lot.
All right. Gala as well?
Gala is the one it's made for.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I wish you all luck. I think you're positioned really well. You've got some decent temperatures coming up. Quite a wide window starting Thursday, could be Friday, could be Saturday, Sunday, all the way to Monday to get some really nice thinning done. And I think we got one more of these chats next week, right, Mike?
Right. Yep. We've got at least one more scheduled for next week. So we'll talk about the 15 millimeter timing then. I'll also just put one more plug. If anybody does want to do fruit growth measurements, feel free, get in touch with me. I can help set you up on your farm to get those measurements done. We can get you the spreadsheets so that you can fill those in pretty easily. So feel free to get in touch with me if you're interested in trialing that this year. And with that, I'd like to take any last questions. But otherwise, I'd like to thank Terence again for joining us today. I'd like to thank Owesco for sponsoring this. And we'll see everybody next week, same time for the 15 millimeter plus discussion.